I want to talk to you today about a very specific brainwave that I think not enough of us know about, and I think is a very restorative, healing brainwave, but it's also very tricky, and I'll get to that in a second. So I'm pulling this from the different brain maps that a consultant does at the clinic that I work at, as well as the quantitative EEGs that I administer. So what I see, what happens with people as they have the electrodes on, and we do different conditions with eyes closed, eyes open, and neurofeedback, and the different other studies that I've just been involved with over the years. And what I notice with that is a really big thing that seems to challenge people is closing their eyes. So closing our eyes can be very stressful for a lot of people. And generally speaking, closing our eyes should actually be a time where we become soothed and the external world has kind of gone away, and there is a very natural increase in something called the alpha brainwave, which is the brainwave I want to talk to you about today. The alpha brainwave naturally increases as we close our eyes, and the alpha brainwave is an inward focused brainwave. So as this stimulus is removed, there's nothing left for our brain to do but go inward. And this is, I think, where a lot of the challenges happen. So a lot of us have a hard time going inward. And this is something that I've seen in just a lot of the stuff that people tell me about, as well as related to sleep. So when they're getting ready to sleep and closing their eyes, they don't have anything else to focus on, and it's very difficult for them to sit in that state. So a lot of people are using different substances, medications, drugs to get them to go right into the different brainwave of delta to help them sleep, but they're kind of missing that period of time that if we can do it more intentionally, it's closing our eyes, having an inward focus, but it's supposed to be a soothing state. And that's not what I see in the data. That's not what I see in the heart rates and the brain waves. When people close their eyes, it tends to be a very anxiety-producing state. So I just want to show you quickly like what I'm talking about in terms of brain waves. So a brain wave, like if you're measuring this in terms of neurofeedback or EEGs, is in hertz. And so it's how many oscillations occur in 1 unit of time. So if this is like 1 second of time, it's how many oscillations are happening within that second. So like a very slow brain wave is like the delta, which is when we're sleeping. And so not a lot's happening in terms of that. The firing is very slow. So there's barely an oscillation, like 0 to 3 oscillations there. A very fast brain wave like the high beta, which I'm going to get to in the next video, is a very fast-paced type of thinking. And there's a lot of oscillations that are happening there. And alpha is much slower than that. It's kind of the one that happens that's a little bit slower than the beta, which tends to be, the beta is our normal waking state. So it's what's happening when our eyes are open and we're interacting with the world. That tends to be our beta, which is a slightly faster state. So what I'm also just kind of connecting this with, as I see what's happening where people are having this really hard time going inward, having a hard time closing their eyes, getting into, even trying meditation, there's something about what I see in terms of sphere of influence. So sphere of influence is basically what we can have an effect on, a sphere, an area that we can create change in. And what I'm seeing, and I think this is happening more and more also in terms of the internet and the different activities that we're doing, is that our sphere of influence is actually we're attempting to make it really, really big to the point where we can feel overwhelmed and fatigued and restless because of this. So let me just show you what I mean. So there's the sphere of influence, which is just you and your internal environment. So that is where you have the most power. There are not very many variables. Well, there are a lot of variables, but you are able to become very aware of a lot of different things that are happening in just you as a sphere of influence. But we have other people where we are trying to affect change. So our very close family relationships, and people that are around us in our immediate spheres. But there's also now a much bigger sphere of influence, which is these outer layers. And I'm going to draw them in blurry dots because these are people where we're trying to create change, trying to get different reactions, trying to have an influence on people who we are not even really going to have one-on-one interactions with, who are, they're not going to know our ins and outs and our patterns, we're not going to know theirs. And what I'm seeing is that a lot of us are paying a lot of attention, a lot of our focus is going to these external, really external spheres of where we don't really have as much power to create change. And it's almost distracting us from going inward, distracting us from going into our closer circles. And this was a big aha for me, was that I started to realize that a lot of me getting very dysregulated and almost hyper-focused on different reactions of people was really throwing me off center, was making me feel overwhelmed in many ways. And part of this was that it was too much focused on these outer layers and not enough focused on the immediate people around me, for one, but also, even maybe more importantly, I'm going to say most importantly, me and my patterns and what makes me feel soothed or what makes me feel stressed, things like that. And so I think a lot of the issues that I'm seeing in terms of this difficult time in having this inward focus is partly because we're so hyper-focused on these external spheres and on external stimulus. So what I want to leave you with in terms of this brainwave to think about is, if there is any opportunities for you in the day to close your eyes and remove external stimulus and allow for that focus to go inward, it's going to be very difficult at first. You're not going to want to do it. You're not going to see the point of it. It's going to cause you anxiety, annoyance, irritation, boredom, all of those things. But if you can stick with it, and this has to do with mental training and our ability to get better at focusing our awareness in a more still, slower way, that the more you just sit with it, and let's say it's 15 minutes a day, out of those 15 minutes, you might only actually feel still for like 5 seconds. And that might go on for at least even a few weeks. But if you don't give up on that and you stick with it, you start to create a almost mechanical, chemical memory within you of a state where you are sitting still, closing your eyes, but staying awake, which is a very difficult state for humans to be in. We're good at being awake and like doing all this. We can sleep, but to ask someone to be still without external stimulus and only be within themselves with their own thoughts, to observe them and notice them, is very, very difficult. So if you can try and do this and try and practice this, I think that you will see some benefits because you will start to recognize patterns, and that can help you get better at knowing why the patterns are occurring. And that's something I want to get more into as well throughout this series, as well as the book that I'm writing. There are much deeper layers to all of this, and some of those, the connection of those dots can happen as we allow that focus to go inward. So I think instead of, or I would say as a complement to, if you are somebody who really wants to create change in the world and you're focused on a lot of these outer layers, take time to go inward and take time to have that awareness. Because as I mentioned in that first video, you are transmitting out signals, these mechanical, physical signals that are related to your internal state. If you are sending them out and you have no idea what your internal state is or why you think the way you do and what your patterns are, then you are transmitting out signals that are very unconscious and might be creating change that you aren't even really aware of how that's being received by others. So I think some of this inward focus is really important, and I want to continue to talk about that in the upcoming videos. So yeah, just take time, just see if you can take extra time to have some moments of inward focus, removing external stimulus. It changes your brainwaves. You may not like it, but I think if you stick with it, you will eventually see some benefits. And you can leave comments for me to talk about that. I am more than willing to go back and forth about how we can make adjustments to try and make this process easier, because I really believe in it. So thanks for joining me, and I'll see you in the next video.